You guys, thank you. That was, I don't know what to say. That was awesome. That was awesome. I wish we recorded all the head bobs. It's great. Some going this way. It's great. Hey guys, we met like, I don't know, a week ago, and we were just talking about just this unique time that we're in. And man, what does it look like to continue just in integrity and in honesty, in loving each other and loving God in such a unique time? And there's a lot that came out when we were talking like 2 weeks ago as it relates to some issues, and we felt like it would be good to dive a little bit deeper. If you missed that, man, it's great to be with you guys, and we love each and every one of you. So what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago is, you know, things can get really complicated in this time sometimes, and you're wondering, you know, what do I do? And it was very similar during Jesus' time. They're like, Jesus, there's so many laws and things, and can you just simplify this for us? And Jesus just said, look, here's what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to love me with all your heart and all your soul, all your strength, all your body. And one of the things I love about Jesus is whatever he tells us to do, like, I want you to love me in these areas, your mind and your heart and your body and your strength. Whatever he tells us to love him with, he cares about those areas. Like, he doesn't just say, love me with these things and then takes a sideline. When he says, I want you to love me with your heart and your mind, I want to work in your mind. I want to work in your heart. I want to work in your body. He doesn't abandon us. It's a two-way street. The very things he tells us to do is the very areas he works. And I'm so thankful for that in this season, that he cares and loves you guys, your minds and your hearts and your bodies and your strength. So we just felt like, man, to have Laura and Dave, I feel like saying Dr. Laura and Dr. Dave, because honestly, it's an honor to have you guys with us, who are two people that have really put some energy and time into studying these areas emotionally, physically, and, you know, and spiritually. And the one thing I love about the Lord is there isn't a separation between spiritual and the physical. It's all integrated, right? When we talk about the spiritual and loving God, it's integrated with our minds and with our hearts, with our bodies. We don't separate those things and say, I love the Lord with my mind or my heart, but then I do whatever I want with my body, right? It all integrates together. And we thought, man, during this time, this season, it would be great to go a little bit deeper with Laura and with Dave about how do we continue to help and grow physically and emotionally in this time, in such a unique time. So I'll let them kind of introduce their background and talk. They're going to each talk a bit. Write down some questions as you have them, but it's great to have you guys. Thanks for joining us. I'm not sure who's going first, Laura or Dave.
I'll be going first. And
right,
thank you, Phil. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, everybody. It's really an honor to be with you, to be asked to speak on emotional health during this time. And my only wish is I was with you in person, because it's so much better to be in person, but I get to see your faces up close, and that's great. So by way of background, I'm a recovering attorney and became a counselor back in the early 2000s, and founded an organization called Serving Leaders Ministries, which is a counseling ministry for ministry leaders. And then we founded SL Counseling, which is what I say, a counseling ministry for normal people. And so I'm here to talk really about emotional health, staying emotionally healthy during this time. And then Laura's going to talk about staying physically healthy and what that means. And I love the fact, Phil, that you said we're integrated beings. We're not just one or the other. We're integrated. And that's really important to keep in mind. So as I thought about what I'd like to share with you, I thought about the word connection. Connection. As beings made in the image of God, we're designed for life to have deep meaning, and we're designed by God with certain capacities. And we're spiritual beings with a capacity for deep relationship with God. We're emotional beings with capacity to deeply feel things. And we're relational beings with capacity to connect deeply with other people. And so as we're going through this time, this difficult time of isolation and distancing, I'd like to ask you to think about, to what extent have you focused on the capacities that you have what you're created to be and created to do and called to do, because God has created us for those things? Or are you off balance? Are you just focusing on one and not other things? So as I think about this idea of maintaining emotional health, connection to three things: connection to God, connection to ourselves, and connection with others. Okay, so that's what I want to briefly talk about. And obviously these are high level concepts with the short time we have. But so let's talk about connection with God. God created us for deep meaning in life, and your relationship with Him is the most important thing that you can have. It's the most important relationship, because God has put a deep thirst for Him in our hearts. David, the psalmist, says, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul thirsts. He uses that picture of thirst for the living God. And in Scripture, the writer talked about God set eternity in our hearts. So that means we have deep capacity for meaning, for purpose, and that capacity for meaning and purpose can only be fulfilled ultimately in God. Yeah, you can find temporary satisfaction, but you can't find ultimate meaning apart from Him, because the relationship with Him provides our ground of being, on which, and is the basis on which all life has meaning. And combined with that, His word, scriptures, give us the lens through which we can see all of life, all of our circumstances, whether we're suffering or whether we're joyful, whether we're getting what we want or not. The scripture gives us the lens through which we see life in its proper perspective. So I would like to encourage you during this time to cultivate your intimacy with Him, connect with Him through prayer, through immersing yourself in the Word, because whatever you're experiencing, I'd love to get like a round table going. What are you experiencing? What's going on in your hearts and lives? Because I don't know. I can only imagine. But whatever you're going through, pain or confusion or loneliness or bitterness or even doubt, even doubting God's existence, we want to cultivate intimacy with Christ in the midst of that pain. So connection with God. Secondly, to be healthy, you've got to be able to connect with yourself. So what does that mean? Connecting with yourself involves cultivating keen awareness, self-awareness. And I would suggest thinking about three questions you ask yourself and really come to contemplate. Number one, what am I feeling? What are my emotions? Number two, what am I telling myself? What's my internal narrative? And three, is what I'm telling myself true? As to the first, what am I feeling? You see, emotions are really important because they tell us a lot about what's going on in our hearts and our lives. So it's good to develop emotional awareness. But for many of us, we've been taught to ignore or repress or run from emotion. Some of us have been taught in our families of origin not to feel. You're not supposed to feel. I had one of my clients I was talking with recently. She said in all of her childhood, no one asked her how she felt about anything. Her feelings were irrelevant. And in some Christian circles, we've been told not to have negative emotions like sadness or anger or being anxious. But those attitudes are not biblical and they're not healthy, because we're made in the image of God. God is emotional in addition to other things. He's an emotional God. The scripture reveals Him as an emotional being who feels. Jesus wept. He wept even though He knew within minutes He was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And in the Psalms, David pours his whole heart out before the Lord. And he says, my tears have been my food day and night. So he's honest before the Lord. He's in touch with what he's feeling. He's not repressing them. He's not shutting them down. So because feeling emotions really is an essential part of being made in the image of God. So I'd ask you, how do you do feelings? What have you been taught about emotions? And what obstacles do you have in allowing yourself to feel? So think about obstacles to feeling. Some of us would say this, and I have been in positions where I have said this: if I allow myself to feel right now the deep pain that I have, will I ever stop crying? Or will I ever stop feeling resentment or bitterness or anger if I allow myself to feel? And you see, another obstacle is we've gotten in the habit of masking and medicating our pain. Many of us are risk averse and pain averse. And it makes sense because who wants to be in pain? But when you mask and medicate, we automatically turn to things that numb us or relieve us. Things like busyness, eating, porn, just numbing in front of the screen. But remember, addictions compound our issues. They never help our issues. They give temporary relief and then make things worse. And if you try to bury your feelings, you actually can't do that. You just bury feelings alive, because buried feelings leak out. Buried feelings hurt us emotionally through depression and anxiety. I had a guy call me today. I hadn't heard from him in years, and he had his first panic attack. Everything was going perfect in his life. He had his first panic attack, and he said, I'm so happy. Everything's going great. I don't understand it. Well, guess what? He's been burying his feelings for so long that they're just leaking out now in panic attacks. There's always a reason for what you're feeling. There's always a reason. You may not know it, but there's always a reason. So it's good to pay attention. And if you ignore your feelings physically, you get tension, you get stomach aches, you get ulcers, you get other kinds of diseases manifest. Laura can talk about that. And relationally, they negatively affect others. But the bottom line is, feelings, whether it's pain, joy, sorrow, grief, anger, surprise, whatever it is, the feelings, the emotions are not the end result. They're not the end result. They're the process by which we move through experiences to bring us to the place that God wants us to go. So don't be afraid to feel, even though feeling is sometimes really painful and uncomfortable. And I'm not suggesting wallowing or allowing your emotions to control you, but to understand what you feel and to then invite God. Remember connection to God? Invite God to come into that loneliness, into that pit in your stomach, into the pain, into the heartbreak, into the heartache. Whatever it is that you're feeling, that's the occasion by which you say, God, please be with me in my pain. Just like Christ was with the Father, just like when he was praying before the crucifixion, right? So we enter into relationship with him. And by the way, we can talk about this another time, but a great exercise to do to explore your feelings is simply sit and ask yourself, and journal this, what am I angry about? Take 5 minutes, put a timer on, write everything I'm angry about. What am I sad about? What am I anxious about? And what am I glad about? Great questions to ask yourself to reflect and allow yourself to go deeper. And the other two important questions then, once you connecting with yourself, you want to ask, what am I feeling? And then what am I telling myself? And is it true? In other words, what meaning do I make of the experience I'm going through? I couldn't go to this wedding. I couldn't go to this graduation. What does that mean? How does that affect what lens do you see that through? And do you come to conclusions like, well, it must mean God doesn't like me, or I'm no good, or I'm being punished? Those kinds of conclusions, those kind of narratives, those stories you tell yourself are really, really important. Like, I'm no good, things will never change, I'll never get through this, I'm not loved, I'm not lovable. All of those kinds of beliefs, underlying beliefs, are really important to get at, because most of the time our underlying beliefs are not true unless they're grounded in biblical wisdom and in the love of God. So the question is, what's true? What am I telling myself? What's true? And is it scriptural? And be grounded in scripture. And then finally, we talked about connecting with God, connecting with ourselves, which is so important. Third, connecting with others. We're created by God as relational beings, as personal beings. God said it's not good for man to be alone. And we're designed by design for connection, for close relationships, with intimacy with other people. That means connecting on an emotional level, spiritual level, in some cases on a physical level with marriage, right? But during this time of COVID, right, it's really hard to connect. Like, we are connected here. I do feel connected to you. It doesn't bother me that your little postage stamps on my screen. It's okay. This feels like connection for me. And so I would encourage you during this time to connect with others. How do you do that? Obviously, calls or video chats. But here's a discipline to think about. Can you connect with at least 2 to 3 other people per day? And I don't mean, hi, how are you, goodbye. I mean, you share sacrificially enter into people's lives. What does that mean? That means listening, asking questions, even if you're uncomfortable. It's a great antidote to loneliness because you need to connect. We need to connect. And so you inquire as to how others are doing, what they're feeling, but also share how you're feeling. Let them know, because that gives them meaning too. And let people have impact on you as well. So bottom line here is connecting with God, ultimately, connecting with yourself, and connecting with others. Those are the three things that I think are really important to maintaining emotional health. And I'm dying to hear your questions, but we're going to first go to Laura. I'll just introduce Laura real quickly. Laura is a good friend. Matter of fact, I met Laura when we connected on one level, and then I hired her to be my dietitian because, put it this way, I'm a little bit overweight, having trouble with my stomach and other areas. So Phil, stop saying amen. Stop. I see you laughing. And so I actually hired Laura to consult with me for health reasons. And so she's amazing. She's a registered dietitian, a master's degree in whatever that would be, dietitian. She's a wellness coach. She's a lot of fun. She's great. And she's actually one of our counselors at Serving Leaders. She does wellness counseling, and she's in the process of getting her master's degree over at Immaculata. So Laura, I'm glad to be with you here, and you take it away.
Thank you so much, Dave. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And I do have to say, Dave is a really ideal patient in these things. So he's giving me a lot of credit, but that was a lot of work on your part, Dave. So well done, sir.
But I'm still not losing weight. Okay.
Oh, Dave, we'll work on it. We'll work on it. Well, thank you all so much for having me here. I just have to say, what a wonderful group of people we have on this call right now. I love seeing all of your faces, and it's just a real privilege to get to speak here with you and be with you and talk about these things around our well-being. That's certainly an area of passion for me. So as Phil and Dave both touched on, we certainly are seeing how our mental health right now is impacted, and our emotions are really stirred up in this time where we're in a very different world, a very different environment than we're used to. And it can be easy, I think, to focus on those things and sometimes miss the fact that our bodies are so closely interconnected with what's going on in our hearts, what's going on in our heads. So it's wonderful to have a moment to kind of bring that together. And that's sort of my piece of this, is just to weave in what's happening with your bodies right now, what's going on with your relationship with your body, and how is your body impacted by what you're feeling and what you're telling yourself. So just none of this that we're sharing tonight is to give you another set of to-dos on things that you need to put into practice for your physical health, or to put a burden on you in any way, but more as an invitation to sort of understand what your bodies are going through right now as well, and how you can help them through this. So let's start with just remembering that our bodies are kind of our home that we live in right now. And if any of you have experienced a time, hopefully most of you have experienced a time in your life of strong emotion. Maybe it was you were really happy about something, or you were feeling anxious in some way, or you were about to give a speech and you had that sort of stage fright moment. You probably noticed your body responding in a very strong way to those emotions. So that's a clue to us that what we're experiencing on the inside, our bodies are tied to. There's a wonderful quote that says, our bodies hear everything our minds say. And this is so true. So we're going to address just 3 quick things. I know we don't have much time around our actual physical well-being. So first thing is movement. And we may have a lot of hardcore exercisers out there. Anyone a hardcore workout fiend? Kudos to all of you if you're really into that. Those of you who don't care anything about exercise, totally fine. What we're talking about tonight with movement is just to kind of notice a change in how we're moving in this time in the world. For many of us, we're at home a lot. We're on our computers. And so just pause for half a second here and notice, what is your body doing right now? How are you sitting in front of this screen? And if you're anything like me, my shoulders are crunching in Just notice what your shoulders are doing. My back is rounding a little bit. My head's coming towards the screen. All of that is closing your body in. So if you can imagine, you're sitting in a chair a lot. Your posture's kind of impacted by that. And if you really close yourself in, go with me on this, just close your shoulders in really tight, slump. Give it your best slump in front of the computer. Can you really get a nice deep breath in this position? Try to take a really deep breath. Not really going to happen. Now sit up nice and tall and straight. Now take that deep breath in. You can actually breathe again. So that's a little illustration of how sitting impacts us. And I think as I am working with clients and with different people in my life, that's the biggest change in their lives right now for movement, is we're spending a lot more time, for many of us, sitting. So first thing to stamp on your brain tonight is to, at any point in the day that you have a chance, stand up and move around. If you love working out and you have your routines for that, for more of an intense fitness routine, go for it. Wonderful. And if any of you have questions on that, I'm happy to talk further about that. But we're not advocating here that you need to go start something like that right in this moment. The key here is just stand up, change from a sitting posture, and move. It has such a tremendous impact on your mental state. We know fitness really changes and impacts our hormones in a positive way, almost mimics the effect of an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. So it's a really powerful thing. When you can stand up and move your body, it helps you connect with your body, and it helps to change your mental state in really powerful ways. A lot more we could say on that. So please send in your questions as fast as you can, if any come to mind. But that's the first thing on movement. Second thing is what we're putting into our bodies, so our nutrition. And I'll have a vulnerability moment here to say that I personally, during this time of the quarantine, have found myself sitting on the couch in front of Netflix, eating mindlessly out of a bag of my favorites. Anyone else identify with that? Some of us do for sure. It's so easy right now to completely lose sight of what we're eating and how we're eating. So again, this is a strange time, and some of us may not be able to follow our normal nutrition. You may not be able to have the perfectly balanced nutrition plan that you can in other times, and we understand that. That's not something that you need to stress over right now. However, we do know that what you're putting in your mouth does affect your body a lot in really wonderful ways, and also has the potential to harm your body or make it harder to be resilient in these times. So a couple things to keep in mind around nutrition. First thing is what you're eating is really important, and whole foods give you more of the nutrients your body needs to thrive and to function well than processed foods. And what I mean by whole and processed foods is just if you grab a food off of the typical snack shelves of the grocery store, turn it around and look at the label, you'll see a lot of ingredients in there, and you'll see a lot of sugar oftentimes, a lot of salt or sodium, a lot of processed ingredients. It's not very close to its original form. The whole foods are closer to their original form. And this can come in the form of fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grain foods, beans. Someone was talking earlier about having to eat all the beans that they had bought. Good for you, that's awesome. Beans are another one. Anything that is closer to its whole form. So this immediately might raise some challenges for some of you if you don't really like foods like that, or if maybe that's a little overwhelming. But one goal is just try to weave in more fruits and vegetables in any form you can. This will sound like I'm your mom talking now, but it really is a very powerful thing. God designed these foods with so much that our bodies need desperately to function well, especially in times of stress where there's more strain on your entire system. So whether that looks like canned vegetables right now, frozen fruits, frozen veggies, maybe it's trying a really simple new recipe when you're not really into cooking, can launch in a small way. Anything to get some of those really wonderful nutrient-packed foods on your plate. So that's the what to eat. Second thing, the how to eat. And this is an area that I personally feel a lot of passion around. And this is emotional eating. I myself have been an emotional eater. And right now, as Dave and Phil touched on, we're surrounded and filled with a lot of emotion that can lead us to cope in different ways. And one of those very common ways is through food. Food is a very powerful thing, and how we relate with it can be very powerful in our lives. So you may be experiencing some of that emotional eating if you are finding yourself reaching for food out of boredom. There's nothing else to do, so we're reaching for food. Maybe that anxiety that you're struggling with right now, or depression, or feeling so unmotivated to follow your normal healthy habits because it feels like, who's going to even notice? Who's going to care? Those kind of feelings can lead us to reach for food for comfort. So be mindful of what is your relationship with food now? What's happening with you and food? And is food taking a place that maybe it's not intended to have? You're leaning on that to cope in some way. And I'd love to help any of you who are experiencing that. It's certainly something most of us experience at some point, but right now we're in a really more of a difficult time around that. So I'm happy to help anyone if you are noticing some of those trends within yourself. It's so freeing to be able to let food be food and comfort come from something more lasting, as Dave touched on earlier. I know we're running out of time, so with my last minute here, we'll switch over to the last sort of trifecta of wellness that we're talking about tonight, and that is sleep. So sleep, I think, is one of those really underrated things. We know sort of that we need it in order to function, but we may not realize just how astounding it is. God wired us to have times where we are unconscious and we are resting. And we're finding more and more about just how important that is. As more research comes to light, we find out that even a small reduction of sleep over a little bit of time leads us to start to act as if we are intoxicated with alcohol. And the scary thing is we don't know it. We think we're fine. We think we're functioning normally. So sleep is a very, very important thing, and it impacts all aspects of your physical body, but also your ability to be resilient around stress. And the troubling thing right now, I think we find, is we feel more stress. Our minds are very busy, very active. We find it harder to fall asleep. So our sleep is impacted, which then impacts our stress. It's sort of this vicious cycle. So Dave spoke so well over some of the things we can do to help deal with our emotional stress. Some of the practical ways you can help yourself sleep a little bit better. Let's see, I'll give 5 tips here. There's so many that we could talk about. Throw in your questions if you have any specific ones. A couple ideas for how to sleep better. Keep your bedroom really dark. That really is a thing. Try to make it as dark as you can. The light kind of cues your brain to stay awake. Second tip, keep your room cooler if you can, a little cooler in temperature. Your body seems to function optimally for sleep at a lower temperature. Third thing, don't eat super late at night if you can help it. Obviously, our schedules are different right now, so that might not be an option, but try to limit late night eating. Another tip, try to scale down on the electronics right before bed. And this one, I will proclaim, I am not good at that tip. Some of you may already be sleeping so well that that isn't something you need to change, but if you do notice yourself watching Netflix on your phone really late at night and you're having trouble sleeping, that could be a factor. Remove alcohol and caffeine closer to bedtime. So try not to lean on those right before you're going to sleep. Those are a couple tips around sleep. So again, I feel like we're firing all sorts of tips and ideas and thoughts at all of you. Thank you for your attention. And we want to hear from you. What are you curious about in these areas? And Dave and I and Phil will be glad to answer any of those questions. So I will close my piece at this time.
Laura and Dave, that was excellent. I just feel like you guys dumped incredible things for us to digest in a short time. So thank you for your prep and giving us that. That was just awesome. How do you guys, Brenna, what's the best way to deal with the questions? Because do we have a couple minutes for that?
Yep. So Meg was going to filter some of the questions to Dave and Laura. And I'm not sure whether, Meg, you want to just say them out loud or whether you're sending them in a private message. But I would say, I know we said, I was just texting Meg, but I didn't finish the text. Even though we said questions in the order they came in, let's alternate between questions for Dave and questions for Laura. So maybe like one question for Dave, then one question for Laura, and kind of go back and forth like that. Meg, does that work for you?
Yeah. Can you let me know if I lag?
You are lagging, yes.
You are lagging.
I'm lagging.
Meg, if you're lagging, Kate, would you want to jump in, looking in the chat at some of the questions that come in and maybe help?
All right. I'm gonna have some material then.
Hey, Meg, hold off for a second because we can't hear you.
There's your little laugh dose. Okay, let me scroll back up and take
Meg, maybe mute yourself. And we're gonna see if Kate can jump in and do it and see if your computer catches up. That was a beautiful lag though.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right.
Yes, there we go.
I had to switch to my iPad. Okay.
Go for
So
it.
we'll start with Dave. This is from Mike Craig. He said he's working 10 hours less per week, but I'm 10 times more stressed because of the cause of the change in job description. How do I best prevent stressed out people getting angry at me? And how do I not?
Okay, wait. Can you hear me now?
You got two screens going here.
All right, I got it.
Yeah, just one's muted.
Switch to my iPad. Okay.
Wait,
We'll start with Dave.
Hang on a second. Why don't we, can you all hear me?
Mike Craig.
Wait,
Hold on, Dave, give her a second. Dave, give her a second. I'll handle it. Hold on one second.
But
All right.
Hey,
Hey, Meg. I need you to,
how do I best prevent stressed out people getting angry at me? And how
All right,
do I
Bren, you have to mute Meg.
let them attack
I did. I just muted everyone. I don't know why it's still going.
okay, Bren, you unmuted the wrong one.
I hit mute all.
Yeah. So the Zoom Providence one is muted, but I'm on my iPad now.
Okay.
I just
Okay,
don't
there's
want to.
still lagged on.
Yeah,
All right. Can you mute both?
one
Meg,
muted.
mute both of you. Let's have Kate jump in.
Wait.
That lag trail, you just have to let that lag trail ride out.
Okay.
Hey, Meg, can you hang up on the Providence one?
I'm recording it.
Okay.
I'm recording. You can hang up. I'm recording. Yeah. Go ahead and hang up the Providence one.
Okay.
Hey, Brenna.
Can you hear me?
All right, hold on, Dave. All right, good. That's better.
All right.
Yes, Dave, what's up?
I was gonna say I can see the question.
Yeah, go
And
for it.
If people can hear me,
Dave, sorry, we just had to take care of that lag sound, so it was gone. So we're good now. You can go for it.
Dave, go ahead.
Okay, great. So how do you can't prevent people from getting stressed out at you, right? You have no control over what people do. What you can think about is, you're obviously working harder, working more in 10 hours less is stressful just by its nature. So again, what are you telling yourself about that? And, to be able to assure yourself, look, I'm working as hard as I can. I'm only one human being and I can't do 20 tasks at one time. I can do one thing well, do it systematically, and basically cut yourself a break instead of imposing the highest standards on yourself, and other people are doing that, that's up to them. But for you, you need to walk in integrity before the Lord and assure yourself, look, I'm doing the best I can. There's only one thing I can do at one time, and that's my limits. So you embrace your limits and don't worry about what other people are thinking about you. You can't control that.
All right, great. I'm going to jump in with a question for Laura. Laura, would you say, when you say eating whole foods and fruits, veggies, things like that, Kenny was asking, how do you feel about frozen vegetables, steamed vegetables? Are there other forms of whole foods that are just as effective?
Absolutely. And right now, I think that's important to remember that going to a farmer's market and getting whole, fresh produce may not be an option right now, and that's okay. Frozen veggies and fruits are, in fact, sometimes fresher than the unfrozen variety. So have at it with the whole fruits and veggies. Canned can also be an option, which we are finding they're certainly inexpensive, so that can be a huge plus right now. So rely on both of those sources. Those are equally good.
Awesome.
All right,
Thank you.
the next one's for Dave. Would you say that happy and glad are the same thing? Any advice for how we can learn to decipher emotions or feelings?
Answer the first one, yes. Happy and glad are the same thing. I would use them interchangeably. And how can we decipher emotions? Is that what it was? How can we decipher various emotions?
How can we learn to decipher emotions or feelings?
So sometimes many of us have a very compressed range of emotion. When I've done workshops, there are some guys who will say, I felt 3 emotions or 2 emotions during the day. And I specifically remember Steve Hendricks years ago had about 18 emotions that he had felt during the day. So many of us are constricted in terms of emotions. That doesn't mean we don't have them. It means we're shut down. So what you have to do is you have to go slow down, and give yourself the time and the room to start to feel, what am I feeling right now? And if you can't feel, then you can say to yourself, what would I imagine I'd be feeling in this circumstance? You know, I'm at a party and it's supposed to be great and people are having fun and I'm having fun. What do you think I would feel if I was actually feeling? That's one way. And the other thing is to think about, sometimes there's a jumble of emotions that we have. It's possible to have many emotions at one time. One way to image that is look at a ball of string, and in order to unravel a ball of string, what you do is you take one string at a time and take it out and look at it. Take another ball of string out, a third. So you take it slow, one thing at a time, baby steps in that regard.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. I have another one for Laura. Would you say that, like, if someone does want to, this is a question from Mike, if someone does want to emotionally eat, even if that's not a habit or a tendency, what's a good mentality? What's an effective way of thinking that can help prevent giving into that?
What a great question. Very, very good. The first thing I think is to, just like Dave said, start to connect with yourself and understand, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling this urge to go eat an entire box of chocolates. What's up with that? What am I feeling? What's the emotion? And if you can, also, what kind of triggered that? What's that coming from? Sometimes just naming what it is enough to let you say, oh, that's what's really happening with me. And you're able to process through it. An easy trick, maybe that's newer to you, the processing your emotions, feeling what you're feeling, is to just say, okay, I'm going to give myself 20 minutes before I go eat that. Just 20 minutes. That can be enough to let you redirect into something else, to let you sit with it and process it if you can, or to just be able to kind of distance yourself from that, get to a different place, be doing something else. So those would be some strategies, but the most powerful thing is to name what you're truly feeling and be able to recognize that that is a longing to be filled in a sustainable way, and food isn't really going to fill it.
All right, we have one more for Dave. Sometimes emotionally, it feels like we get caught up so much in the unhealthy cycles that it feels impossible to get out. How do you take the smallest baby steps in a healthy direction?
That's a great question. I would say, again, slowing down in order to feel and allowing yourself to feel. Most of us have this knee-jerk reaction when we feel pain to run from it. So when you start to feel, what am I feeling? I'm feeling anxiety here. Where am I feeling it in my body? Just try to slow down and feel where it is in your body. And then the question becomes, what am I thinking? Emotions always follow thoughts. Okay, thoughts precede emotion. So it's a great idea to be able to go back and go, what am I thinking about this? So for example, if I got off this Zoom call and I felt really bad, maybe my thought would be, I didn't do really well. But it's an unconscious thought. It's called an automatic thought. It's a little bit below my conscious level. I have to explore my feeling and then chain it back to what did I tell myself and what do I believe? That's a shorthand way to say that's basically cognitive therapy, basically going after what am I thinking and how does it impact my emotions?
Dave, how would you discern whether during this season where we've been less connected to people in general, how would you discern whether people you've kind of fallen out of contact with is a sign that you've outgrown that relationship and kind of naturally grown apart and to let it go, or if it's worth reaching out and trying to reconnect?
Wow, that's a hard question because I'd have to know more of the circumstances by which, what's the relationship like? And what I guess the first question is, what do you want to do? Like what happens for you inside when you think about connecting with this person? And why is it that you think you've outgrown them? What does it mean to outgrow somebody? That has a lot of different meanings. And sometimes it could mean something like, they don't stimulate me anymore. I don't really enjoy being with them, right? And if that's the case, I just wonder what the question would be, what does love look like? What does it look like to love a person that you're not as stimulated by, but maybe it would be really important to maintain a relationship, right? That's one on one hand. On the other hand, is this relationship toxic? Is it a relationship that is emotionally destructive? And when you start to think about emotionally destructive relationships, toxic relationships, it's really helpful to handle that by putting up some boundaries. I told you in my former life, I was an attorney. I am an attorney, and my specialty was something called radiation litigation. And you go, what's that? Well, that's actually defending nuclear power plants when they're sued. And before you think, oh boy, that's pretty evil. No, we were science-based. And so one of the things I learned about nuclear plants and radiation is that you have to shield yourself in small doses. Everybody gets doses of radiation. You're getting it right now from cosmic radiation and background radiation. But in high doses, it's toxic. So how do you protect yourself from radiation? Time, distance, shielding. Time, meaning the shorter the stay time, the less toxic. Distance, the greater the distance, the dose rate falls off. And shielding means that when you go to the dentist and you go see Megan to take x-rays, she puts lead on you. That's shielding, right? So toxic relationship, you do have to have time, distance, and shielding ways of keeping apart and protecting yourself. So that's a healthy thing to do. But if you want to follow up with a follow-up question, I'd be happy to answer that. But other questions? Great question.
If you feel down, what would you do to lift your spirits? This is a question from James, and he says that typically he would do something for someone else to lift his spirits. what would you do to, in a healthy way, lift yourself if you're feeling down under
Yeah.
the circumstances?
I think the first thing I would do is I'd say, what am I feeling? And when you say down, is it depressed? Is it sadness? Is it grief? What's situationally going on that's making you feel down? And then sometimes, by the way, feeling down, feeling sad, there's a reason for it. So I don't want to necessarily lift myself out of that if there's a good reason for it, right? If something's going on that's hard in my life, I want to give myself permission to feel it and enter into that and invite God into it. But if I'm, if it's a kind of thing like I occasionally have struggled with anxiety and I've struggled with depression. So when I'm depressed and I know what that's a mind game. It's like your mind gives you very negative messages all the time. And the easiest thing in regular life becomes really hard to do. And so if it's that kind of down, I love your suggestion of doing something for other people. Giving yourself purpose is a really important thing. So I want you to think about this concept. If you have the most grand idea of accomplishing something, whether it's creating a company, creating a song, creating a recording, whatever it is, you can't go do that task. The only thing you can do is one task, and it's the little task that steps forward to that big thing. So Brenna, if it's writing a song, the first thing you got to be doing is, what's the concept? And then you start to maybe write, and then you back off. Every one of those are small tasks. One of the things I suggest when you're feeling down and depressed is to give yourself very small tasks to do, because that gives you purpose and it gives you volitional agency, meaning it gives you some control when you don't feel like you're in control. And so I know that depression, for example, that thinking about something like, oh, I got to go pick up those socks over there, can be extraordinarily hard to do because everything becomes slow and mired down. And so one thing at a time, baby steps, and then success begets more success and begets more success, and that can lift your mood. And if Laura was here, she would say, run, do exercise, move your body, because I love it. Did you hear she said exercise? It actually creates endorphins in your body that mimic antidepressants. So that's another way.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. I think this meeting's going to get cut off at 8:45 because that's like the time limit we put into the Zoom meeting. So there is one more question in here for Dave, and then the other two remaining were for Laura. So we'll have Laura fill in with those after. Yep. If you have any other questions for Dave, fire them in here. We have a couple minutes left.
And by the way, Brenna, I put my email address in there on my website and Laura's email address, so feel free to write us. But go ahead.
Cool. We'll share their contact info also via social media later, so you can all follow up with them personally if you'd like to. How would you deal with relationships with parents when parents are expecting or pushing for certainty in plans or goals during such an uncertain time? What small steps can be taken to ease some of this pressure?
Okay. So depending on the relationship you have with your parents, whether it's an open communication relationship or not, really matters. And so I guess the small step would be to communicate very clearly what your limits are and what's a reasonable expectation for them. And for them to expect, to be able to express with a respectful way, look, you're asking me to make plans, concrete plans in a time of uncertainty, and I just can't do that because I don't know. I'd like to help, but I don't know. And so just be really clear, communicate really clearly about it. And, and then say, how does that sound to you? And if they, you're not going to get their pleasure, for example, you're not going to get their approval maybe, but you have to be able to stand strong in what your limits are, and clearly communicating your limits is I think a great idea. So, hey guys, I just want to thank you for letting me come on and hang with you guys and share. It gives me a lot of joy and pleasure. So I'd love to be with you another time, or if you guys want to. I love walking at Stroud's Preserve. If anybody wants to go for a walk, Megan knows this. Let's walk. go 8 feet apart and just walk. So anyway, good to be with y'all.
Thank you so much, Dave. Any other last minute thoughts, questions for Dave?
Yeah.
Or any other thoughts? Anything?
Any
Thank you
other
very
thoughts?
much, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
You're very welcome. Great to be
Thanks,
with you.
y'all.